Okay, so let's get into it. Window of tolerance. So first, let's begin to talk about explaining and giving you an idea of what the window actually is. That would be helpful. The window is the ventral vagal optimal arousal zone. Okay, so we're taking the ventral vagus nerve, which is connected through the majority of your body, and that thing, when it is being appropriately adhered to and connected, your nervous system is being appropriately connected to and adhered to, and you have an overall sense of connectedness and well-being. Well-being might be overstating it, in my opinion, but an overall sense of at least connectedness to yourself, to your experience around you, the world around you. Here are some signs that you are within your window of tolerance. And overall, again, so your window of tolerance represents your capacity for resiliency. So it represents how much life stressors you can absorb and take on without acting in a way that you will later regret acting in. That's where you're most likely to make better choices in your life, and that is the key symptom for me, is because you're able to think rationally and feel your feelings simultaneously. And if you're able to think rationally and feel your feelings simultaneously, you're integrating two aspects that help connect you to your ventral vagal system. So you're integrating your parasympathetic nervous system and your sympathetic nervous system, and you're not having too much of one or the other. They're appropriately adequated and integrated to one, and then they're connecting within this center location. They're integrating in here and meeting here in the middle, right? So if you're able to think rationally and feel your feelings simultaneously, you're within your window of tolerance. I've had clients before say when they're in a state of hyper-arousal, where they're feeling their feelings but not thinking rationally. Well, I'm thinking. Are you thinking rationally? And just that question for them to be able to reflect and kind of look, no, I'm not rational. It's the number one symptom for me. Then, and some other symptoms here is you have the ability to self-soothe. So you have the ability to be able to make choices that are appropriate for yourself and be able to ground yourself. Another big sign here is you're open and curious versus judgmental and defensive. And so I don't want to get on a high horse here, but here's what I'll say about that is you can look at systems, big systems, governmental systems, for example, and you can begin to see this problematic feature from a tribal standpoint, where people are not open and curious. There's judgmental and defensive. Let's say, for example, if you had two main political domains that were opposing one another, for example, not getting political here, one side saying you guys are ignorant, you guys are closed-minded, you guys you're intolerant, and all these other things. And then the other side will say, you guys are ignorant, you guys are closed-minded, you guys are intolerant, and all these other things. And the two sides, if you really listen, and you don't need to listen too closely, but if you listen, they're saying the same thing about the other side. And that's because they're judgmental and they're defensive, and they're not willing to be able to even understand the other side, especially in real hot topics. They're like so hands off on hot topics that they can't listen. And so there's a problem. And yeah, they're willing to tell the other side that they're intolerant, but they're also intolerant. It's just kind of the way it is, and they're judgmental and defensive. However, if you're looking at a system that's open and curious, and you're able to have good dialogue and be able to try to understand where the other side is coming from. So first, understand where the other side is coming from, and then to be understood from where you're coming from, and then let dogs lie where they're at from that standpoint, then you're probably open and curious, right? And that's a good place to be, is to be able to try to first to understand, then to be understood. That's a good core element of communication in general. The other things here is feelings may be uncomfortable, but they are tolerable. So people get kind of misunderstood here within the window. They think that if it feels unsafe or it feels uncomfortable or it feels scary, or they're having feelings of anger or they're having feelings of sadness or whatever, that they're outside of their window. I would disagree. It's okay for them to be uncomfortable. That's actually a sign that you're beginning to stress and push on that window of tolerance. So let's pretend this little box screen that I'm in right now. If I'm going to go to the edge of it and I'm going to push on the edge, I'm going to push it out and push it out and push it out. That's what this would represent, is being able to try to expand this box, being able to try to make it larger, being able to try to grow it larger and push it out. And that would be this example of the expansion of the window of tolerance. And the only way to do that is to be able to go into those places of discomfort and challenge those areas, and not to try to avoid those areas, not to try to escape from those areas. So that's what's going on there. Being able to integrate grace and boundaries. I'm going to have another video, and if I can figure out how to do this, I'm going to link the video in the show note thing, and give you another video on what grace and boundaries is all about, because I think it's integral. So have sustainable, consistent ways of being towards standards that you have for yourself and objectives that you have for yourself. So that's the window of tolerance in a nutshell, or in a small little window there on your screen. Okay, now let's go into hyper-arousal. So hyper-arousal is this hijacked sympathetic nervous system. Okay, so the sympathetic nervous system in of itself, it's great, it's fantastic. If right now somebody comes in through this back door with a weapon, I better react appropriately, which is either going to be in flight or fight, right? I don't know how I'd react, but I have a guess of how I would hope I would react. But you know, that's the sympathetic nervous system. It's attuning to what you need to do in that moment to be able to survive, and being able to even fine tune that sympathetic nervous system. You can really do some good work within expanding that and your capabilities as a person, and being able to feel feelings and be able to connect with other people's feelings and empathize, all of that stuff. Some good work in there can be done when you're appropriately connected to that sympathetic nervous system. However, too much of it, when you're flooded with it or hijacked with it, it's going to cause you to act like some primitive being, and that's problematic. Because the guy cutting you off on the road shouldn't cause you to start acting like some primitive beings. Get yourself together. You're being hijacked by your sympathetic nervous system. Let's begin to talk about what that means, too much of the sympathetic nervous system. It starts off with feelings of tension. So you begin to feel feelings of tension in some way. Maybe your body starts responding with a higher heart rate, and likely it does. If you're attuned to your body, you'll notice a higher heart rate. You begin to feel higher energy, not even necessarily a positive energy, maybe too much energy, like you've had too much caffeine or something. You feel pressured, and you might feel clenching. For me, I'll feel clenching in my jaw when I begin to have too much of this sympathetic nervous system going on. Overall, you can feel unsafe. The world you want to perceive it to be is unsafe, and something is tapping into that. Some outside source or some internal source is tapping into that and making it unsafe, and that's causing you to get dysregulated and begin to feel these feelings of tension and begin to have these feelings that represent like chaos, or feelings that represent anxiety and anger, etc. The thoughts become defensive. There's a cyclical, compulsive component to it, and being overwhelmed. So let's talk about the cyclical, compulsive component. The cyclical thing would be like these, almost like these ruminating thoughts, right? Like these thoughts that are kind of happening over and over and over, like you're watching a 5-second TikTok video over and over and over and over about your own life that you hate. And then you can go into real compulsive thinking and compulsive behaviors that can lead actually to impulsive thinking and impulsive behaviors. There is thinking that's going on. It's just irrational. It's just irrational thinking. It's chaotic thinking that's taking place. You become very short in your temperament, in your speech. You become hyper vigilant, impulsive, and angry. So the more you sit in this hyper-arousal zone, the more aggressive it becomes, the more it steps out, and you step out more and 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 outside of that window. And the more you step out, the more negative potential outcomes that can happen, where you say and do things that you later on got to apologize for, or end up in jail for, or what have you. Overall, the sense is feeling like a victim. It creates a fight-flight response in order to not feel attacked, not feel small, and to not feel defenseless. I've told clients, oh, well, you feel like a victim, and that's why you're acting so aggressively right now. Ooh, they don't like that. I'll call it out, but they don't like it. And that's because they're being a victim, and they don't like being called out on their stuff. Just as much as I wouldn't like being called out on my stuff if I'm feeling like a victim. So that's what that looks like. It's really this sense of feeling like a victim. It can kind of chase back to feeling like, it could be some internal child stuff, some previous traumas that has happened where you felt overwhelmed or out of control, or you felt like the world around you was trying to bully you. The experience around you was trying to overcome you, and you felt small, and you don't want to feel that way. No one wants to feel overpowered by another person. That's a snapshot of the hyperarousal. So people will go into the state of hyperarousal, and oftentimes with years of using this as a resource, as a survival mechanism to try to make themselves feel safe, they don't even realize that they do it. In fact, some people will even see this as their safety zone. So let's then go into the hypo-arousal zone. So their anecdote is, for my clients, is the majority of them first start off over here in this hyper-arousal state, and then they'll come over into the hypo-arousal state. So they'll feel their feelings too much, and they don't like that, and they don't like they feel like they may do too much over there, so then they'll jump over here into hypo-arousal. So let's talk about the hypo-arousal. So hypo-arousal is the immobilization response of the parasympathetic nervous system, and it's overloaded. So again, parasympathetic nervous system is something that's fantastic when you have the adequate amount. It's something that you utilize within yoga, and you utilize within grounding work, and all that sort of stuff. However, too much of it, again, too much of anything is going to give you negative symptomology. So let's talk about it a little bit. So it first starts off for the majority of people, and the way that I've seen it and looked at it, is the majority of people almost automatically go there when there's some sense of something has happened that is uncomfortable. They go there. Again, for the majority of my clients, they'll stay a little while in the hyperarousal, then jump over into this disconnection from feelings. But I think for most people, they'll just kind of go there into this hypoarousal state. And what's scary is they'll stay in this hypoarousal state for years and years and years. It's a state that people can sustain with very negative outcomes, but for some reason it's more sustainable than the hyperarousal state, where you're going to end up in jail or with a heart attack or something. But okay, so the hypoarousal state starts with disconnection from the sensation of feelings, okay? And these are a numbing of a large spectrum of feelings that once were typical for this person to be able to feel. The person was able to experience these feelings. They actually liked being able to feel these feelings. But at some point, the person began to disconnect and disassociate from these feelings because they felt more safe by moving away from the feelings. It is a state that a person can stay in for a long time. And so they're spending large chunks of time in autopilot, not being attuned to their needs and responsibilities. The thing that my screen is covering up their needs and responsibilities. So this is probably the most common form that I see with my clients, is this autopilot state. So autopilot is an interesting one because there's actual like productive autopilot. Think of like my wife, who's a stay-at-home mom. She can go into autopilot quite a bit, and oftentimes be pretty productive in the autopilot when it comes to mind-numbing chores and activities, like putting away the dishes and cleaning up after my 15, 16 to 20 kids. And pilot can come in handy there, where maybe a person doesn't want to be deeply connected to this moment of putting each dish away. It's mind-numbing to them. If they're in this hypo-arousal state, they're thinking about something negative that they're fearful of, or they have anxiety towards, or they're thinking about somebody else's and their family's problems, or something like that. There's also this form of autopilot where that kind of connects to escapism, where people, you're going to just play video games for hours on end. You're going to watch Netflix for hours on end. You're going to watch the game. All these sort of different things where there's an avoidance of feelings that's happening within that. The person is really trying to escape and avoid feelings. They're really they're not okay with the feelings. It's too much for them, and therefore they're just going to completely disconnect, and that causes this lack of attunement towards their family members, towards their children, towards their spouses, toward themselves. And as a result, the bottom part here is there can become this creation of passivity and lethargy. Often helps produce over-analysis of matters of little importance. So this passivity happens, and the people, they just don't have the energy to stand up for themselves. They get manipulated by other people who know this about them. They'll just say, okay, fine, whatever, that sort of thing. There's a sense of just not having the energy to stand up for themselves. This comes from this lethargic sort of way of being, and this can actually include like weight gain and like actual like not moving around very much, and not taking care of themselves, and really not taking care of themselves. And what's the most easy, fastest way to take care of this need? Like, think of it as like a McDonald's drive-through version of taking care of your needs. So have a lot of thinking going on within hypo-arousal. There's thinking, but sometimes there's thinking towards things of very little importance. They might go into a place of thinking about like some fantasy world within a video game. So they're thinking about some alternate universe where they're happy and important. All right, so that's some of the stuff that can happen within the hypo-arousal state. Okay, so let me begin to integrate these two. So you have the hyper-arousal side. The hyper-arousal side is feeling your feelings too much, but you're not thinking rationally. The hypo-arousal side is you're not feeling your feelings, and there's maybe not rational thinking, but there's definitely thinking going on. There's an analytical process that's going on, and there's sometimes it's like a purposeful avoidance, and sometimes it's a subconscious avoidance. If you integrate the appropriate amounts of sympathetic within the hyper-arousal and the appropriate amounts of the parasympathetic within the hypo-arousal, then you're able to integrate the two, and they're able to combine and create a window of tolerance experience, right? And you're able to be within that window to where you're connected to yourself, you're connected to the world around you, you're thinking and you're feeling simultaneously, and all of that other stuff I've already mentioned. So that's how you can integrate those two things.